Peter, one of the traditional teachings about God is that God knows the future. And one of the traditional teachings about human beings is that we have free will and morally accountable. Being somewhat naive philosophically, it seems like these two positions are contradictory. How do we make progress?
Well, let's begin by asking what we mean by free will. The idea of free will, or as I prefer to say, free choice, depends on the idea of when you make a choice between two alternatives, you're able to choose each one of them. For example, if you're trying to decide whether to lie or to tell the truth on a particular occasion, if you're able to lie and able to tell the truth, then your choice between lying and telling the truth is a free choice. So then the question becomes, if God knows the future in every detail, knows it infallibly, and so on, knows right now what you're going to do when you're struggling to decide whether to lie or tell the truth, and God already knows that you're going to lie, in what sense is your choice free choice? In what sense can it be a free choice? Now, you'll hear some people say, well, look, God just sees you in the future lying, or as it may be, telling the truth. That doesn't force you to go one way or the other. That's quite true and quite irrelevant to the real difficulty. Here's the real difficulty. Suppose you're going to lie, and of course then God sees that you're going to lie. He already believes it right now. He has that belief. He knows it, so he believes it. Are you able to tell the truth, even though that God now believes that you're going to lie? Well, what would happen if you did do this thing? Tell the truth that you're able to do. Surely if somebody says they're able to do something, we can ask, well, what would things be like if you did?
God would believe a false...
Either it must be that God was wrong in that belief, or that the past was different, that is, that God believed something else back there in the past.
Right.
Nobody can make God wrong. It says so on the label, right? He's always right about everything. On the other hand, nobody can change the past, whether it's past having to do with God or with anything else. That's the difficulty, and it incidentally is very similar to arguments about the incompatibility of causal determinism and free will.
Okay, so people have come up with various kinds of solutions. One of them is so-called middle knowledge, where God has this counterfactual knowledge of free creaturely choice that was determined a long time ago, that God is not forcing us to make a decision, but he knew what free creatures would do if placed in certain situations.
Well, of course, the question then comes from, where does the truth of these statements that God knows, about what creatures would do in certain situations, would do freely in those situations? For example, if the mayor who had, say, freely took a bribe for $25,000, had been offered a bribe of $20,000, would he freely have taken that lesser bribe? Well, if there are really truths to that form, if God really knows either that if the mayor had been offered a bribe of $20,000, he would freely have taken it is true, or knows that that statement is false, where does its truth come from? Some people, like Thomas Aquinas, say, well, God just decrees that. But then, although Thomas does insist that we have free will, it's very hard to see how that could be in that case. That is, if God says that, first of all, decrees that if the mayor took the bribe, he would, if the mayor were offered the bribe, he would have taken it freely, is true. And if the mayor had, God also decrees that the mayor was offered the bribe, then how can it be that the action is, as it's supposed to be, free? Other philosophers, like the 17th century Jesuits, the 16th century Jesuits, insisted that God just finds these statements about what people would freely do in certain circumstances. They're contingent, they differ from world to world as to which ones are true. As things are, God just has to look and say, oh, here's the set of ones that's true. Still, we have to ask in that case, which of the premises of that argument that I gave is wrong? that is, the argument is, if I'm actually able to do this, then it must be that if I'm able to do this thing that God foreknows that I'm not going to do, then it must be either that I can make God have been wrong, or I can make the past be different from what it was, so that he had the right belief about what I was going to do in the past. I can't do either of those things. That's just the argument I gave before.
It's the same thing.
But where does middle knowledge come in there? How does it show which of those premises to reject?
Okay, so we have this internal inconsistency, apparently, between what God foreknows and our desire for free will, and what gives in this in a theological context. I mean, you believe in God. How do you deal with it?
Well, there are various possible ways of solving the problem. One very popular way, particularly in the Catholic tradition, the solution of Boethius and St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, is that God isn't inside time like the rest of us. He's outside time. So there isn't any such thing as what God believed at a certain time in the past, because his beliefs are timeless or eternal. The trouble with that, from my point of view, is that although God's beliefs may not be in the past, he could reveal what was going to happen to someone in the past, to a prophet, or he could cause a stone to appear with the truth about what I'm going to do inscribed on it. In 1900, a stone could have appeared ascribing this action to me in the future. I can't make the stone have been wrong. I can't change the past that the stone appeared, or if a prophet predicts what I'm going to do, divinely inspired by the timeless God, but he, the prophet, speaks at a certain time in the past about what I'm going to do. I can't make the prophet not have said that. I can't change the fact that what he said then was divinely inspired. So I don't think that postulating a timeless God really helps with the problem. The only solution I see is to see that God really doesn't know what the future free acts people are going to be. And if you say that that's inconsistent with the doctrine of God's omniscience, I might say, well, it depends on how you formulate it. After all, most people don't think that the doctrine of God's omnipotence implies that he can just do anything. It doesn't imply that he can draw a round square, for example, or both make it rain and not rain at the same place at the same time, because those acts are, those states of affairs are intrinsically impossible, internally self-contradictory. Thomas Aquinas, for example, says nothing that implies a contradiction falls under God's omnipotence. Well, supposing that God knew the free acts of, God's knowing the free acts of future creatures was an impossible state of affairs. Even then, an omnipotent being couldn't find out what creatures are going to do in the future, not what they're going to do freely in the future, at any rate. Why not qualify omniscience in a way similar to the way in which we've qualified omnipotence? Why not say that God knows everything that it's metaphysically possible for a being to know about the future? It's just not metaphysically possible to know what free beings are going to do in the future.
So let me put it this way, that if we start out with a very hard omniscience and a very hard free will, and we look at it and we say the only way to make these things work are with some very complicated philosophical ideas, which ultimately don't work. What we then have to do is weaken one of these other two. And you're saying if we weaken omniscience, then it works. But weakening omniscience, if we look at it, really doesn't weaken it, because we're just asking it not to perform work that is really unable to do, because it's in one sense impossible or logically inconsistent, because you can't know something that doesn't exist.
I think that's right. Yes, I would say that to say that a being is an infinite being is omniscient is to say that that being knows everything that it's possible for an infinite being to know. But maybe there are things that even an infinite being can't know, like what the free action or what the outcome of a genuinely free choice in the future is going to be. If that's so, then this omniscient being could still be the greatest possible being. And that's what's at the root of our idea of God, is that he's the greatest possible being.